Hello, MCU fans. Today we're going to be piecing together the clues in Agatha All Along, Episode 3. And boy, oh boy, do I have some wild theories to share, especially about teen. There's some ideas I haven't heard anywhere else. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So, lots to discuss. There will be spoilers, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have a September contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, and you could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out in case you're interested. All right, so once again, the episode titles are part of the Ballad of the Witch's Road. Notice, through many miles of tricks and trials. And of course, here's the entire ballad, and there's that line in the ballad. In fact, we're going to be coming back to the ballad a couple times because this episode references it a lot. All right, so going for a little walk down the road, and Teen says, "It's exactly how I pictured it." And one of the few nice things Agatha says in the whole episode is, "It suits you." So that's really sweet. So then Mrs. Hart says, "You know what this is? This is a kidnapping, and I think it's high time we involve the local authorities." But of course she discovers, okay, no cell service. I mean, what good horror movie doesn't start with the cell service being cut off? Of course, they're in another dimension, so it makes sense that it's cut off, but still, I really love that detail. So then we learn a little bit more about Teen, because they say someone really needs to call this kid's parents. And he says, "I'm 100% positive they're asleep." So he certainly is referencing them in the present tense. Now, I've heard some people suggest that in episode 2, Teen revealed that his mom died because he says, "My mom went to see her last tour," and the her in this case is Alice's mom that he's talking about. Her last tour right before she died, R.I.P. So the she is the tricky part. Right before his mom died or right before Alice's mom died? Well, number one, I don't think you would say RIP about your own mom. You would say, "I loved her very much," or something like that. But I'm really certain, since we know that Alice's mom did die, that that's who's being referred to here. So I do believe his mom is alive. And then later he talks about his dad loving something. We'll get to that in a minute. But the key is present tense. So I think it's really important that both of Teen's parents are alive. That goes with the theory I'll be talking about in a moment. Okay, so then we learn that Mrs. Hart is a member of the Westview Historical Society because she humorously comments on, "All I would have expected to see down here were remnants of our failed public transit system." So that's kind of a funny joke, but I do think something's going on here because in the closing credits, they show an image of, maybe it's a postcard or something like that, but for Westview, and it's historical, obviously, but it shows a hex. Maybe that's Wanda's hex, sure. Or maybe it's somebody else's hex from the past. And in fact, we see a pentagram as well inside the hex. So yeah, there is something really strange going on here. I think there has been some witchiness, if you will, happening in Westview for quite some time that we're going to learn about. All right, so then Teen gives some awesome encouragement. Says, hey, anyone can be a witch with training. And that's really important. It dispels this rumor that like you're born a witch or, the devil gives you your powers. No, you can learn to be a witch. And in fact, we learned that in WandaVision episode 8, when Agatha said years of study that Agatha had to do to achieve even the smallest convincing illusion. And she's just so mad because obviously Wanda could do magic seemingly without all this necessary study. And of course, Doctor Strange learned magic through study. So I just think it's important that they are demystifying some of these rumors about witches, that they're creepy, devil worshiping, all that stuff. No, they're just people who trained and learned to do magic. Interesting. All right, so then, what is it that they're up against? Lilia says, "Tame your fears," which is a line from the song, obviously. Says, that's what we're up against, our worst nightmares. And then Alice says, "And they will be trials." At least that's what the song says. So back to the song, notice that there will be trials, and you will need to tame your fears. So very cool. I love that. All right, so then Agatha expounds upon it, because remember, she's been on the road before, or at least she says she has. I think it's going to be interesting to find out if she's lying or not. But she does seem to know a lot about the road. But she says the road will test us and our knowledge of the craft. One trial for each skill. But then they say, or Jennifer says, well, how can we pass them without any power? And once again, Teen has some good encouragement, says, well, there's always analog magic. Labor-intensive, manual acts of magic. So again, making this point that anyone can be a witch if they just practice and learn analog magic. But I love it. Jennifer's like, again, who are you? She says they're all getting kind of annoyed at him. And then once again, we get the voice distortion as he's not able to say what his name is. But now we get a name for what that is. So Lilia says, well, I'll be. Someone's put a sigil on that boy. That's not a word I knew, so thank goodness they explain it. It's a redaction spell that hides something. In this case, you from witch folk. So that's interesting. So she's saying in particular, it's witch folk are the ones that would not be able to hear the words he's saying. So it's kind of a bummer that Mrs. Hart at this point walked away. Kind of convenient too. But anyway, it's a bummer because probably I'm betting regular people who are not witches would be able to tell what he's saying, because we're going to see that I think he's had this sigil on him for several years. More to my theory in a moment. But that would mean that if he's walking around and that thing's appearing left and right, everybody would be afraid of him. So no, I think it only appears when he's talking to a witch. Okay, very interesting. So Agatha almost protectively gets in front of him and says, well, we can crack this open later. The real value lies at the end of the road. And she reminds everybody what's at stake. She says, if you want to unbind, and if you want to reverse your fortune, and if you want to find out what happened to Mommy, then obviously we need to head down the road. But interestingly, she then turns to where Mrs. Hart would be and says, and you, I want to know what she was going to say. What on earth were you going to say is the benefit for Mrs. Hart? I guess to find the perfect bottle of wine, because clearly Mrs. Hart loves the wine. But anyway, a funny line here where Agatha goes, you take your eyes off her for 2 seconds. She's like a little puppy, wanders away, right? So here she is, off the road. That's not good, right? Up there by the creepy tree, setting her purse down, and then her purse starts to get sucked into the ground, and she's very distressed because, it came from Talbot's. Of course she's distressed. That's an expensive purse. You can't have it, she says. Well, luckily they come to rescue her, not her purse, mind you, but they rescue her and pull her out, and then we learn an important tip. You can't just walk off the road like that. I stray not from the path, quotes Teen from the song. So once again, let's look at the song, and obviously, hey, there you go. I stray not from the path. So this song is so important. In fact, I'm kind of interested to see where a couple of these lines will finally show up. Familiar by thy side. How is that going to come into use? Because when I think of familiar, I think of like, a witch's familiar. And I don't think anybody has their familiar with them. So that is interesting. And then blood and tears and bones. Oh my. That line should be interesting when it comes into play. So anyway, I love this ballad. Really going to keep an eye on it as we go along. All right, so poor Mrs. Hart says this is just a really, really, really horrible party. Because remember, she thought she was coming to a party. But things start to look up because they see this beautiful beach house just off the path. Look, they say, was that there before? And as Agatha notes, I think we need to stop saying that because that's going to probably happen a lot. So now they head up to the house, and they realize that the door may hold clues as to what's on the other side because it's a full moon, and that is the water phase. And of course, we know from the episode that water is going to become one of the death traps inside there. So I do think we're going to see fire, water, earth, and air type of trials. So one trial for each of the witch's different types of powers. That's going to be interesting. But this one is water. All right, so Mrs. Hart, polite as always, says, well, we don't want to surprise anyone, so rings the doorbell. Love that. But Agatha, of course, just barges in. But notice now the perspective, or the aspect ratio, rather, is going to change. Notice how I even tried to reflect it here in these images, but notice, boom, we go to a full screen, basically. And that's very similar to WandaVision, because whenever the hex was in place during some of the sitcom-y things, the aspect ratio changed. So I love that. So we're definitely in a spell at this point. But really not that bad of a spell, right? I mean, it's a beautiful beach house, not exactly the stuff of nightmares. But they realize when they come in to these different spells, all of their clothes change to reflect the spell. The road changes for the coven. So these spells are dependent upon the specific witches, but also then, as you can see, they're transformed. So I'm trying to figure out what this is paying homage to. I thought at first it was going to be a horror movie. It doesn't seem like it's a direct horror reference. Instead, it reminds me of Desperate Housewives, which if you've never seen that show, especially the first season, is unbelievable. But yeah, they were a bunch of catty housewives trying to get through life. But also, then whenever you say Housewives, you can't help but think of the Real Housewives shows. So I haven't watched those. That's not my jam. But if it's yours, that's great. But in both of these seem to be kind of reminiscent of what we're seeing in this episode. But I do believe they give a big clue as to what they're trying to pay homage to, because we hear them say, "Have you seen Huge Tiny Lies?" And Lilia says, "Oh, it's Huge Tiny Lies everywhere." Well, that is definitely a riff on Big Little Lies, the HBO show, which was about a bunch of women dealing with all kinds of crazy things. So very cool. All right, I like that. So then we see Agatha immediately checking to make sure the brooch is still there. That's very important to her. Has that hair in it, remember, inside the locket. Also, we see Agatha looking for a way out. Now, assuming she's telling the truth, that she's been on the road before, then she knows there's a way out of every trap. So she's trying to get out right away, but she can't. There's no knobs on the door. Interesting. All right, so man, talk about an ominous foretelling here. Mrs. Hart says, "Bury me in that kitchen," which, ironically, she is basically buried in the kitchen. So yeah, R.I.P. Mrs. Hart, but we'll get to that in a moment. All right, so clever reference here, I think, to Agatha's child, because the little note that they find, she says, "What is this, a wedding? Please, not a baby shower." Because obviously something happened with her son, Nicholas, and we'll learn a little bit more about that in a moment, but it certainly seems like she did something nefarious with her child. So yeah, she is not interested in a baby shower. Then we see that it's an invite to the first trial. The Witch's Road cordially invites you to the first trial. And then we see that it starts with a riddle. Now, obviously, the riddle turns out to be wine, but I do think there's a second meaning here, particularly the "I mess with your mind, and my tricks are well known." So kind of hold on to that thought here for a second, because they say that sounds like a witch. Interesting. Hold on to that thought. And then they say it sounds like you, which is true. She's that way. Funny line here from Mrs. Hart where she says that's gorgeous card stock. That's all she really cares about. But she also spots the wine, so she gets 10 points for spotting it. Now, if we translate the wine, it says Queen Red, breeding 2016, and product of Spain. So I'm not sure that all of these are a hint towards this, but I do think the earlier thing about hallucinations and witch, I think they're at least making us, remember Wanda. Every chance they get, they're trying to keep Wanda in the background. I don't think Wanda had anything to do with this. I don't think Wanda's casting this spell. I don't mean any of that. I just mean the writers of the show want us to remember Wanda. So, because this 2016, so I've heard some people say, 2016, maybe that's relevant. I mean, that's Civil War in the MCU timeframe. It's not when Wanda first did this. Obviously to Tony, that was in Age of Ultron in 2015. So I just think this is a general reference to Wanda, and I love it. The more they keep us thinking about her, the better. All right, so then we get a warning about Agatha. Jennifer says, "Watch your back with Agatha. Did you know she traded her own son for the Book of the Damned?" Okay, so now we're getting what we thought was the truth. It sure sounded like Nicholas Scratch was turned over to probably Mephisto for the Darkhold. In fact, remember, she's the one that said in episode 2, "Who's this? Another child sacrifice?" So she certainly seems to know something about Agatha's past. And then she says, they say no one knows what happened to him. And she goes a step further. They say he might be dead. Others say he might be a demon or an agent of, they used it, Mephisto. So in some interviews, Jack Schaefer has said that she didn't mean to create so many theories with WandaVision. I mean, we all went crazy with theories, which is hilarious, but that's what we do as fans. But she made it clear this time everything will pay off. So I think this mention of Mephisto is going to go somewhere. So I know we all know who Mephisto is, but I can never resist the chance to show an old school classic cover. This is his first appearance, actually versus Silver Surfer. So yeah, I think we're either going to see Mephisto or his shadow will weigh heavily over this series, one or the other. All right, so then they are really, really hinting that this mysterious son of hers, this Nicholas, is teen. Because look at this line where she says, "I doubt she'd even recognize her own son if he showed up at her doorstep." So you know what they're trying to hint there is this is her son and she doesn't recognize him. Because we have seen that Agatha really cares for Teen, and we're going to see at least twice later in the episode where Agatha listens to what Teen says. She trusts Teen. And she tried to save Teen. She wouldn't even let Teen go on the Witch's Road, remember? Tried to shoo him away. So I think they're trying to hint that he is Nicholas. He is not. I guarantee it. There's another theory I'll get to in a minute, but I love that they're doing good misdirect. That's awesome. All right, so Mrs. Hart wastes no time in downing the wine. I love it. They're all like, okay, wow. And she's like, "Look, I have had a very hard day. Do not judge me." That's epic. Love Mrs. Hart. She definitely had the best lines of this episode, probably because, she wasn't going to make it through the rest of the episode. But anyway, this really seemed familiar to me, right? Because a timer starts, and now we're going to see that they have to solve a puzzle to save their lives. Otherwise, they die. So what famous movie chain falls into that category? I think of Saw. And maybe you might say, oh, you're stretching. No, actually, the creative team told us in an interview that the show has references to, and she is actually saying Suspiria, but the closed captioning couldn't translate it. But anyway, but she also says even Saw. Even Saw will be referenced in the show. So I don't know whether this is a Saw reference, but let me know your thoughts. It really feels very Saw-like. But anyway, so they're not realizing the danger yet, so they do a toast to the prize, the ultimate prize. And this is another reason I think of both Desperate Housewives and Real Housewives, because they're always drinking wine in those shows. Too funny. All right, so Mrs. Hart, notice, gets a second glass of wine. So there's a couple reasons I think that she was not saved at the end. And this is the first one. She drank twice as much wine as everybody else. So in theory, she needed twice as much of the antidote. So keep that in mind. But there's another big reason I think that she didn't make it. All right, so Agatha, on the other hand, doesn't get a second glass. She dumps out her first one, does not want to drink it. So then we see Alice's tattoo. And Teen is saying, I really like your tattoo. Where'd you get it? Isn't that a symbol that wards off curses? So that's important. And Alice says, yeah, my mom made me get it because all the women in our family were cursed, is what her mom said. So you got to get this thing. But she also said her mom was crazy. Kind of wrote her mom off. But this is the biggest thing. And we'll talk more about her mom when we get to the hallucination. But she says she got it when she was 13. And Teen says, a lot happened to me at 13 too. Okay, we're going to pause the breakdown now for a big theory on Teen. I think we have enough to pull together a theory on what is going on with this dude. Okay, here we go. Work with me. So he said a lot happened when he was 13, when we learned in episode 2 that he's currently 16. That is very important. We also know from the ending credits that when they show his name, it says near death in Westview. And if you look through the credits, every time they show somebody's name in the credits, they do something about them. So this is tied to him somehow, this death in Westview. Then if you pause slowly, it goes by real fast. They actually give us a date for when this near death happened, or at least when the story was written, which was December 13th of 2023. That is very specific. Okay. However, we learn that he was born and raised in Eastview, not Westview. So you think, okay, this isn't related to him. Oh, I think it is. Hang on. So then, if you remember in episode 1, when she was under the spell, Agatha talked about a car wreck about an hour before time of death. She doesn't say whose death, although it's implied it's that corpse that she finds. But hold on to that thought. So she's asked where, and it's in Eastview. So this actually happens in Eastview. And she says there's blood stain in the back seat, front 2 airbags deployed. Okay. Hold that thought. Then, this is critically important. Back in WandaVision, Agatha told Wanda, you're supposed to be a myth, capable of spontaneous creation. That is so critically important. She can literally create something out of nothing. And here you are using it to make breakfast for dinner. Oh yes, your children and this whole little life you've made, this is chaos magic, Wanda. So, keep that in mind. Wanda can create things with her chaos magic. Then she puts the boys to bed, right? And kisses them goodnight and walks out of the room. We don't see what happens to them. Presumably, the hex, washes over them as it slowly vanishes and the kids vanish. But remember, she can create things, spontaneously create things. So is it possible that she actually created souls for the boys? Now, she wouldn't have created a soul for Vision because Vision doesn't have a soul. He's an android. The boys, though, would. So even though the hex vanished, did their souls stay around? Interesting. Okay, let's put all this together. So this timeline is very important. WandaVision is in November 2023. The near death in Westview, they gave us the date December 14th of 2023. Multiverse of Madness, believe it or not, many people forget this, but a timeline book confirms it's November of 2024. She has literally studied in the Darkhold for a year before she goes nuts, which is why I've always said that's why she went nuts. She studied the book of the damned for like literally a year. And then Agatha All Along is in 2026 for sure. I think October, but certainly 2026. All right, so let's look at our different facts. Wanda's capable of spontaneous creation. There was a near death in Westview on December 14th of 2023. A lot happened to Teen when he was 13, which would be 2023 because he's now 16 in 2026. His parents are alive. He is from Eastview, and there was a crash in Eastview 1 hour before someone's time of death. 2 airbags were deployed and blood in the back seat. So I'm going to throw out the idea that these 2 events are completely tied together. The near death in Westview, December 14th of 2023, that is the near death of the souls of Billy and Tommy, because they almost died. They didn't die. I mean, the hex went away and they would have died, but instead their souls stayed around because they were still created. They probably went somewhere. I don't know if Mephisto got a hold of them, perhaps, but the point is their souls nearly died. Okay, then there was a crash in Eastview 1 hour before time of death. I think that time of death is Teen's time of death because he said a lot happened to him when he was 13, 2023, right around the same time the hex was vanishing. So do you see where I'm going with this? I think the soul of Billy went into Teen to keep him from dying. So, or he did die, and then the soul brought him back, however you want to look at it. But yeah, I think those things are all tied together. So the 2 airbags were for the parents. The parents are alive. They survived. But the blood in the back seat is because Teen would have died. Instead, the soul of Billy went into him. Whoa. Okay, but we still got to ask the question then, who put this sigil on him? Well, let me throw out a thought. It kind of looks like an M, right? Like a cursive M, little squiggle on the left, squiggle on the right. The thought's been maybe that's Maximoff, or maybe it's a W for Wanda. I'm going to throw out it's an M for Mephisto. Because in the comics, there's a crazy story how Master Pandemonium went to retrieve the souls of Billy and Tommy. It turns out Mephisto was tied into all of it. It's nutty. They're not going to do that. There will be no Master Pandemonium with arms that have Billy and Tommy on them. But the idea that the souls were somehow connected to Mephisto, and Mephisto was involved then in Billy and Tommy returning, I think Mephisto sent the soul into Billy. Or maybe it went on its own, but I'm betting Mephisto sent it there. And then Mephisto put this on there so that no one would know who he is. So why would he do that? Well, because Wanda, if you remember, is still alive at this point. So when this hex went down, if the soul transferred out of little Billy in the hex into Teen, she would have spotted it immediately because she's sitting here just working on the Darkhold. Remember, we discussed this. She was looking at the Darkhold for a full year. So I think Mephisto wanted to make sure that no one, including the Scarlet Witch, knew that her son was alive, Billy. And maybe Tommy's going to come back in Vision Quest with some other crazy way. But yeah, that's what I think happened. Let me know your thoughts. I'm trying to pull all this together with only 3 episodes of information, yes, but I think they've given us enough to try to piece this together. Plus, if you pull some of the lore from the comics, I think it all fits. Let me know your thoughts. I would love it. Okay. So now we get some ironic foreshadowing when Lilia says, do you see any pointy hats in here, any green skin, any brooms? No, because she's trying to dispel all these rumors of what a witch is and isn't, which is funny because we know from the closing credits as well as from some of the trailers that they will be green-skinned with pointy hats and flying on brooms. So that's hilarious. All right, so then Mrs. Hart may want to rescind this wish of hers because she said, I would drink the blood of a virgin if it would smooth out some of these wrinkles. And then suddenly they look up and they're like, oh my gosh. And she's like, what? Oh, you're so sweet, thinking they're saying, that I don't really need anything done to smooth out the wrinkles. Oh my word. So back to the whole Desperate Housewives and especially the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. This looks like Botox gone awry. And I suspect most of the people, at least on the Real Housewives show, have all had some form of Botox. Hopefully not something that turned out that poorly, but definitely had some Botox. Too funny. But on the other hand, Lily is fine. She says, honestly, I don't hate it. Too hilarious. But then she gets a random divination and suddenly says, I love you guys. Interesting. Why did she say that, right? It makes no sense. But then again, she's also said some other weird things. She said, get off me in the second episode. And later in this episode, she says, try to save Agatha. So we need to keep track of all these random things she says because they're all going to come into play. She is seeing the future. And I think these exact words will be vital to the plot in some later episodes. All right, so it's now crystal clear. This is a trial for Jennifer, that only she can use her potion skills to come up with an antidote to try to solve the issue. So she starts talking to Mrs. Hart to try to understand how the toxin is working. And finally, she does figure out that it's going to cause hallucinations and eventually death. So that's not good. And in fact, we start to see the hallucinations right away because Mrs. Hart / Sharon Davis says, Wanda, I'm begging you, let him breathe, please. So what I think is happening here is she's seeing the past. She's remembering when this happened, right, in WandaVision episode 1. But what's so just morbid and so creepy about this is probably what she was actually saying when this was happening. Because remember, in the episode, she was just smiling and laughing, going, stop, please, just stop. No, that was what was happening in the spell. In real life, she was probably saying, Wanda, I'm begging you, let him breathe, please. Wow, does that ever make you rethink that episode of WandaVision? My word. All right, so then she passes out. And unfortunately, that's the last we will hear from Mrs. Hart, at least for now. I hope she comes back somehow, but for now, that was it. No more from her. All right, so Agatha, teen realize, has cheated. You didn't drink the poison. You can't cheat, Agatha, he says, and she refuses. She's like, I'm not going to drink that. And he says, drink. Look at his face. He's ticked. He is really ticked. And Agatha listens to him. Remember, I said earlier that it seems like Agatha trusts him. And when he is very, firm with her, she does what he says. So she drinks it and then jokes about it being really cheap. That's funny. And then says, okay, potions witch, it's time to brew an antidote because now she gets her nasty Botox. So, man, stay away from Botox. I'm telling you, it may work in very, very small doses. I don't know. I've never tried it. I ain't ever going to. But this is what can happen. Maybe not that bad, but boy, that Botox, man, that is dangerous stuff. Anyway, this is so cool to me. So, we have seen a lot in this episode where they're trying to demysticize witches from being, these devil-worshipping, just weird, creepy, scary creatures. Here, we're finding that all the ingredients she needs sound creepy, and yet they're all very common things. She says, I need frankincense, which turns out to just be inside a spice. She says, I need the gut of a eusocial insect. Well, that is referring to a bee, and in particular, the gut would be honey. She says, I need a corpse that's been decaying for at least 30 million years. Well, that would be dinosaurs that have turned into petroleum and now have gone into her crappy skincare stuff, which she said didn't have any jelly in it. So you see how each of these things sound really creepy on the surface, but given a different context, they're not a big deal. In fact, I love this one. Eye of newt, she realizes she needs. And of course, that's just a mustard seed, because that's another way to describe that. And then I think the coolest one is she says, now I just need a really big cauldron. So is she going to have some witch's scary black cauldron? No, she's going to use a sink. So yeah, really cool how they're just showing that historically witches have been written off as just awful creatures, when in reality, these are all just common things they've done because they learned magic. They learned witchcraft by studying. Very interesting. Okay, now let's look at each of these hallucinations. The first we'll look at is Lilia. Notice it's saying, speaking in Italian, do you want to see, this young girl says. Well, I would have had no idea who the young girl is, except the credits tell us. It is young Lilia. Okay, interesting. So this is young Lilia asking her, do you want to see? And remember, she does divination, so it's almost like, do you want to see the future? This is her almost saying to herself, do you want to learn a divination? So she heads into this room to see what's going on. And ooh, we get this creepy old lady. That is incredibly creepy. And then we learn from the credits that this is Lilia's maestra, which is actually translated to Lilia's teacher. So this is the person teaching Lilia how to divine or see the future. So then behind the teacher, we see slowly standing up death. Yikes. And then as Lilia runs out, she's speaking now in Sicilian. She's dead. They're all dead. So I think the big key is she's dead, because that's referring to the teacher, but they're all dead. So if you remember in episode 2, when asked, don't you want to be a witch again? She says, oh, like when I was chased out of every village I passed through for accurately predicting tragedy. So I think what happened here is not only did she predict tragedy for maybe other witches and several other people, but most importantly, for her teacher. I think she predicted the future for her teacher and told her when she was going to die, and maybe the teacher drove her out then. or maybe others did because of that. But I think in particular, she literally once she's taught divination from her teacher, she then predicts her death. Yeesh. Okay, but let's talk about death. This is interesting. So, in the song, love the song, right? There is a line, I hold death's hand in mine. So is that meaning death is with them on this journey? Because we're seeing death there. Well, interestingly enough, the Funko Pops gave us some potentially spoilers. You never know whether this stuff is really going to come true. But obviously, there's a Funko Pop for Wiccan. So, I mean, I think we all know that Teen is going to be Billy, right? If they don't make that happen, we will all be so annoyed. In fact, they really technically messed up during one of the trailers because in the Spanish version, if you turn on the Spanish closed captioning, they actually, instead of putting Teen, put Billy. So, oops. Anyway, we got to wait and find out. Maybe he's actually Nicholas, and who knows. So I don't know that this is the spoiler to me. This is the interesting spoiler. I hold death's hand in mine, right? And there's death. What is going on? So there's a Funko Pop for death. Does that mean death is going to be in the series? Is Rio death? I mean, I would have thought Rio would have got a Funko Pop. Or did they just not make one for Rio, and is death a separate character? I don't know, but this is really interesting. Lilia sees death, the song talks about death, and we're getting a death Funko Pop. Let's keep an eye out on that. All right, so Alice's hallucination. She heads into a sauna, and she sees her mom. And her mom is actually in the closing credits. That's her. And her mom lights a lighter, which is interesting because witches were often killed by fire. In fact, we'll see fire coming into play a little later. But yeah, she lights a lighter, and then she says, your grandmother died today, and it's my turn now. Because supposedly she died on the road. Remember, we learned in episode 2 that her mom died on the witch's road. So this implies, though, and maybe this is what Alice is just thinking, that her mom drank something poison, because she says, it's going to kill me, and she's drinking something here. I don't know what is going on there. I wish I had a better idea to give you. And then she screams, I can't protect you. So it doesn't make sense she would kill herself. I think she was maybe trying to drink something to protect herself. I don't know. But remember, she had Alice get this tattoo as a protection. And Alice views herself as a protection witch. So it's almost like she's devoted her entire life to protect. Remember, she was a security guard at the mall. So I don't know what it is that she thinks she needs protected from and what her mom was saying. But yeah, this one, I think we're not supposed to know the real answers yet. All right, so then we see Jennifer's hallucination. And we see this creepy dude turns around and says, you are an inconvenient woman. How often throughout history have men said that to women? Ouch. And then he grabs her and dunks her. Oh, that is just hard to watch. And then he says, and now you're nothing. So I don't like this guy. The credits list him as the doctor. So we know he's a doctor. But somehow, whatever he's done to her, Jennifer later feels is the reason she is bound. He stole my magic. So what did he do to steal her magic? I don't think we're supposed to know at this point, but we're supposed to be guessing. So kind of keep all that in mind. But very, very interesting. All right, and then we get Agatha's hallucination, which actually happens much later because she drank her wine later. But I'm doing her hallucination now where she looks inside a crib and it's the Darkhold. So this is reinforcing the idea that she gave up her son, Nicholas, to get the Darkhold. And then she recoils in terror, which I think is a really cool homage to Rosemary's Baby. If you've never seen that, just trust me, whatever she sees inside the crib makes her make that face. It's a terrified face. Really good acting. So yeah, I think that's an homage to that, which is kind of fun. But I think there's something else at play here. Because remember, Rio said, do you remember why you hate me? And of course, we don't get the answer to that. So I'm wondering if Rio is somehow tied into this whole giving up Nicholas to get the Darkhold, maybe making a deal with Mephisto himself. Somehow Agatha and Rio both are tied into this. So we'll have to wait and see. All right, so then the saw trap, because I really do think this is a saw trap, gets more dangerous because now they're underwater suddenly. You know, the water that was a beautiful beachfront is now covering the entire house. There's a crack in the window. Of course, that's because Agatha beat the window. So maybe had she not done that, the water wouldn't come in. But I think it was going to come in no matter what. But now they're got to hurry, right? So they brew up the antidote, and then they realize, oh my goodness, we don't have a way to make the sink boil. So yet again, a commonplace solution comes to mind, a sous vide, which I would have had no idea what that is, but he then explains it. It heats water to a specific temperature so you can cook your meat evenly, which, yep, that does exist. I've never used one, but it looks pretty cool. So, again, this is this theme of the witches aren't these mysterious, crazy people. They're using common things to solve the problems with their knowledge. Then everyone pull a strand of hair out of your head right now. So this is also something pretty common because you might remember in Thor Ragnarok, Doctor Strange needed a strand of Thor's hair to help try to find Odin. So that's very consistent. But I am wondering, she says a single strand of hair. Everybody, hurry up. I think a second reason that the antidote did not work on Mrs. Hart is they didn't get one of her hairs. Now, maybe they did and it was done off screen, but I never saw it happen. I don't think they got her hair. So not only did she do 2 doses of the wine, but I think more importantly, I don't think her hair's in there. Just a guess, but I think they messed up. All right, so they may be the reason she died. Then she realizes suddenly, I forgot something. There's something missing. And they're like, hurry, you got to figure it out. 1 minute left, 1 minute left. Now's when she says that line about, I'm bound. He stole my magic, so she thinks she's powerless. But maybe the best quote of the episode is Agatha telling her, they can take your power, Jen, but they can't take your knowledge. So she realizes she can solve this, and she remembers, I need the blood of the unpoisoned. And then I think it's really funny. Agatha takes no hesitation to grab the knife and cut Teen's hand. And she says, thanks for being underage, which taken out of context, that line could get you in trouble. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's kind of funny. But anyway, she says, thank you for being underage. And they put his blood in, and now they finally can drink up. And then they realize, wait, the timer's still ticking. And oh, my goodness, Mrs. Hart, she needs some of the potion. So they put the antidote in her, and I love it because they say, careful, don't spill it. But Agatha's like, dump it in her mouth. Agatha does not care about anybody. So either they did not give her enough or her hair was never in there to begin with. And so lots of reasons that I don't think this worked for Mrs. Hart. Then finally, the door opens to escape, which, back to the song, remember, if you tame your fears, a door appears. So now they have a door, but I think the fear they have to tame here is the fear of being burned, right? Because witches have been burned historically. So they're either going to be drowned if they stay or they're going to be burned if they go in an oven. Yikes. So, choosing between 2 terrible ways that witches were killed in the past. Then Lilia says, a friend of mine, this happened to, and she had a lovely house. So I think that's a reference to Hansel and Gretel, which is kind of cute. Like she actually knew the witch that this happened to in real life. And then they realize, they got to decide. You're either going to drown or you're going to get burned, maybe. So yeah, they're going to get out of here. They're heading into the oven. Ooh, that's kind of scary. Then they realize, no, we got to get Mrs. Hart. We can't leave her behind. But Agatha, showing her true colors again, says, not a chance. Leave her. I'm out of here. And once again, it's Teen that helps straighten her out. It says, we don't know what happens if we leave her behind. And he's right. And Agatha's like, okay, fine. But yeah, I think she really respects Teen. She knows Teen knows what he's talking about. Maybe Teen knows even more than he's letting on. So very interesting. All right. Agatha says she's so heavy. Why is she so heavy if she's so little? Too funny. All right, so they go down this slide, and it's worth noting the trees are red. Remember, when they entered the first trial, the trees were blue. I think the blue are for water, and the red are for fire. But of course, the slide certainly reminds me of the Goonies, which that looks like fun. And then at the bottom, they realize we all made it out. We made it through the first test. Everyone survived. Well, not everyone, because Teen explains Sharon is dead. And we see her, oh, poor Sharon. That kind of annoyed me, man. I love Sharon. And just, she got drug into this, not her fault at all. And now there she is, dead. But I will throw out an idea. I am wondering all along if Sharon is a little too suspicious. How, she was just happened to be out there picking flowers, all ready to go. Notice she has the earthy type outfit on there, the flowers. Well, remember, they needed the earth witch, the green witch. So is it possible that this was Rio all along? Because I don't know how they opened the door without the Earth Witch. They said they couldn't have even opened it without one. So what if Mrs. Hart is still back in her house chilling, and this was Rio using a spell to pretend to be Mrs. Hart? I may be crazy, but I don't understand how Rio is going to suddenly appear on the road. We'll find out next episode, but I'm going to throw out a crazy theory that Mrs. Hart actually has been Rio all along. So we'll see. I would love that at least, because that means Mrs. Hart is okay. All right, so and then Agatha gets the last line by, who's Sharon? We don't know who that is, right? Because she only knows Mrs. Hart. So even when poor Mrs. Hart / Sharon dies, still, Agatha doesn't even respect her for who she really is. And they're like, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? No, there's nothing wrong with her. She's just Agatha. So, loved this episode. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about it? What do you think about where the series is going? We're up to episode 3 now, heading down to the doubleheader, episode 8 and 9, right before Halloween. I am loving this series. Want to know your thoughts as well. Also, don't forget, September contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, and you could win that book or steelbook. And there's that membership option in case you're interested in that. And, of course, we have the Discord. I always love to bring that up. Here we have an Agatha All Along spoiler section where they're talking about that death, right? What is going on with the death? Billy mentioned Skeletor is now canon to the MCU. Yes, I guess so. So anyway, we have 1,700 members on the Discord across the globe, conversations 24/7. And we would love for you to be part of it. I will leave a pinned comment so you can join the Discord. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.